let's get a couple of facts on the table to deal with spin like this coming out from federal Labor today in Canberra. Here's the Shadow Treasurer, Queensland MP, Jim Chalmers.
And we're talking about a lockdown which comes as a consequence of the Prime Minister's failures on vaccines and quarantine.
Hotel quarantine, the fault of Scott Morrison? Funny. That's not what Daniel Andrews says. Here he's in fact taking the credit for it all being his own clever idea.
And of course the army of people who are working in our accommodation hotels under a plan put forward by Victoria at the National Cabinet to move to a compulsory hotel quarantine model, and was very quickly adopted around that National Cabinet table by all states and territories. I think it's served us really well.
And Chalmers' other claim that it's the PM's fault too when it comes to vaccines. Let's be clear. The Commonwealth is responsible for vaccine choice and supply. It's the responsibility of the states to administer the system to get the supply into the arms of residents. Insofar as there's been a meltdown of Victoria's vaccine hotline, the fact that the online booking system started back in January is still not delivered, all of that sits squarely with the state government. If Morrison's national vaccine rollout was in fact causing lockdowns, why are these problems in Victoria now and nowhere else? Why is Victoria on lockdown 4 and no other state comes close? Frankly, this sort of spin just infuriates people living the day-to-day reality of state government incompetence in Melbourne. With the announcement today of a federal government support package to help Victorians out of pocket by this lockdown, to be honest, I've got really mixed views. It's hard to begrudge people who can't work getting some help, but I'm nonetheless frustrated to see the Commonwealth yet again bail out and make excuses for the most destructive and incompetent state government in Australia's history. Surely the government that orders the lockdown must pay for it, and not the government, the federal government, that's already handed over $46 billion to Victorians, 3 times more, in fact, than their own state government. At least with today's announcement of a new week-to-week payment during lockdowns only and split 50-50 with state governments, the feds have modelled it off existing disaster payment systems. And that's fitting because the Andrews government is a disaster. But as much as some Victorians need help, I feel for taxpayers and the rest of the country forced to again bail out a state as a 4-lockdown basket case and doesn't seem to be learning from its mistakes, lurching from one crisis to the next that no amount of spin can cover up. Let there be no doubt, this lockdown, first for a week and now for a fortnight, is only happening because Victoria's tracing system can't cope, even with just a handful of new cases per day. The acting Premier all but admitted as much in his press conference this afternoon when he said that the extra week was needed to absolutely, he says, run this thing down before going back to the pretense that it's this beast of a virus.
This is not a choice. We don't choose to go into lockdown. You know, there is no choice. That's the advice from our public health team. So when we get advice from public health experts that you must go into lockdown and have a series of restrictions in order to run this to ground and ensure it doesn't escape and become uncontrollable, that is not a choice for government. It's not a choice for Victorians.
If he'd just come clean and fess up that Victoria's tracers were overwhelmed, at least you could respect his candour. But coming clean about anything is not in Victorian Labor DNA. There's this constant need, isn't there, to find an excuse, something, someone, anything to blame other than take responsibility. As expert after expert has made clear, starting with Professor Peta Credlin here last night, there's nothing novel or especially scary in the way this Indian variant is behaving.
The numbers we've seen so far don't suggest that this is behaving as a virus hugely different to what we've seen before. It's in the same ballpark.
Again, this beast of a virus talk is just an excuse to cover up for epic ineptitude.
I have described it as an absolute beast because we have to run it down to the ground.
Today, Professor James McCaw, a member of the Australian Health Protection Committee, said that, and I quote, "There's no epidemiological evidence that this virus spreads faster, and I don't think it's helpful to seed alarmist or doomsday type thoughts into the community." Then there's the Victorian government's latest stunt, expecting businesses in regional Victoria to police the rules against people leaving Melbourne. That infamous ring of steel, well, it's no longer an option. Out of Victoria Police and the powerful police association, the union, declared it a waste of officer time and frankly no barrier to the virus, they said, given how readily the ring of steel was evaded. So instead, under pressure, small business operators and their staff are now the unpaid frontline workers forced to do the job the police won't do and that the state government hasn't done itself in months. This is the Victorian government that only last week, only a matter of days ago, formally mandated a single government QR code app. In other states, a single government app has been used for months in New South Wales, over a year. Now it's up to regional businesses to strictly enforce new check-in rules and not serve Melburnians. I mean, come on. What's a cafe owner or a bakery supposed to do? Refuse service? Ask for ID? If not, call the police? How dare a government that can't do its job expect small business, which we know it treats with contempt, to become unpaid COVID enforcers? And then there's the latest from Daniel Andrews, pretending to sympathise with Victorians on his Facebook page, needing to have, and I quote, "another week off work," he says. Now, coming from someone who's literally had months off work, fair enough, he's on sick leave, but the words he uses are beyond wrong. They're arrogant and they're out of touch. People who can work from home are not off work. They're trying to do their work under the most difficult possible circumstances and look after their kids, all of that thanks to his government. And people who can't work from home, indeed, they mightn't be working, but they're not off work. It's not a holiday, it's not by choice. And unlike the Premier, many of them, of course, are not getting paid, or at least they wouldn't be getting paid if it wasn't for Josh Frydenberg signing the cheques. When is this shameful embarrassment of Victorian government going to be held to account?
Will you, if you're going to give support to Victoria, which you clearly are, will you ask to see the advice on which, the medical advice on which they base this lockdown? In other words, was it necessary or was it political?
Well, again, our officials, our health officials, are talking to their officials, and we do want to know the reasons for the decisions that they've taken.
You're being asked to fund it in a way, so it's reasonable to say, why the hell are you doing it, isn't it?
Well, it's absolutely reasonable to ask those questions, and they're questions we're asking.
But it wasn't a quid pro quo. And I think the Treasurer today missed a real opportunity. Before signing any cheque to bail out Victoria, he should be demanding the public release of Brett Sutton's health advice. Enough of the secret briefings, this beast of a virus advice that now a dozen or so infectious disease experts, which Sutton isn't, have all publicly disputed. They say the truth is the first casualty in war. Maybe that applies to a pandemic too, but in Victoria, I think truth from this government has been absent for a lot longer than that.